This is an interview with Mrs. J.W. Newcombe, Ardmore, Oklahoma, on March 11, 1956. Mrs. Newcombe, where and when were you born?
I was born in Bastrop, Texas, April the 6th, and the year is a secret.
Well, couldn't you tell us?
Not this time.
Well, how long have you lived in Ardmore?
I've lived in Ardmore something over 55 years.
How long have you lived in what is now southern Oklahoma?
The same length of time.
For what reason did you move to the Indian Territory?
I came to visit a sister who was homesick and lived in Wynnewood.
How did you travel?
I came on the Santa Fe Railroad, the same railroad that now goes through Ardmore.
Would you like to tell me about your trip to Wynnewood and all?
It was a very ordinary trip. I didn't like any of the places until I passed through Ardmore, Marietta, Vacaville, until I came to Wynnewood. And when I saw Wynnewood, I said, this is the place I like. And we stopped there.
Well, would you describe Wynnewood at that time?
Wynnewood was it's set on a hill, very much in view from the railroad. At that time, the time of year, it was green, and the trees, all that was green, and was very beautiful to look at.
What was your social life like?
We attended parties just like you girls do at the present day. It was rather new in that at that time I knew very few people, and when everybody was free with his invitation, and if you knew people, it wasn't off the record at all did not know people. It wasn't off the record at all that you went to a party at their home, and everyone was very friendly and pleasant.
What type of clothing did you wear at that time?
Oh, I wore just what I wore in Texas. I was a Gibson girl. I wore shirt waists and sailor hats. I saw a picture of a sailor hat today advertised by Brown that's very much like the sailor hats that we wore at that time. And long skirts with a good many ruffles around the bottoms.
How many petticoats?
Oh, 3, possibly. Not as many as I wear at the present time. Mine were hand-ironed, and we didn't wear so many.
But you had to keep them clean and iron stiff, didn't you?
Starching and ruffles and embroidery were very important in there.
Well, what did you do in Wynnewood?
I did nothing at first other than visit with my sister. The need, when they found out that I had taught in Texas, then they immediately began to ask if I would help take over and serve in the schools. I couldn't teach Indian children unless I had a special license that was issued out of Tishomingo, and through the family of the Colberts, Ben Colbert, who was later on one of Roosevelt's aides, helped secure that. Then the city board issued certificates instead of a state issuing them, the city board.
Well, did you teach a specific school, boys' school or girls' school?
I taught in the public, what they call the public schools, and I taught in the 3rd and the 4th grades.
In other words, it was a co-ed school?
It was a public school.
Mm-hmm. Like today's?
Yes.
Did you have any unusual experiences with your students?
Other than just as any teacher would have, other than any teacher would have.
Well, about how large were your classes?
about the same as they are at the present time.
Do you have any unusual experiences?
No other experiences than most school teachers have. I had some interesting pupils, and like all teachers have, but nothing unusual that I recall at this time.
Well, what was your school like?
Like any other public school, other than we had no regular buildings, no real buildings built. We used store buildings, and anything that we could get up till the time that the city was able to vote bonds and really build a school. But in the first few years that I was in Wynnewood, it was just makeshift buildings. Very cold. They sat on top of a hill, and if I remember correctly, there were no even boarding around the bottoms, no solid foundations. It was a very cold location.
Well, did you ever teach any Indians in your time?
There were Indians attending the school, but I never taught in any real Indian school, just set aside strictly for the Indians. At this time in Wynnewood, I met Mr. Newcombe, and we went back to Texas, and I was married. We lived in Wynnewood until Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving Day. Thanksgiving morning, I waked in Ardmore at the old Whittington Hotel. I must have been about 1902 or 3. And one of the interesting sights that has always been a nice memory to me, was seeing a black Phaeton with white wheels, aluminum wheels, driven by a lady that later on became one of my very dearest friends. She drove a black horse with 4 white feet. This was very effective, and I thought it was the epitome of all that was grand and beautiful. This was Mrs. C.L. Byrne, who lived here a good many years. And our life I had no home at that time. Nearly everyone went to boarding houses and lived in boarding houses. There were 2 rather prominent ones. One was the T.L. Morgan, and another was Captain Johnson, where the Gulf Station is at the present time. Everyone, a great many people, and I only recall Mrs. B.L. Simpson as one of the young married couples who was here at that time. Also, Mrs. Price, who was Lucy Poland. She also is alive now, that was here at these boarding houses. The schools were, as they were at Wynnewood, city schools. This was the Indian Territory, and they had no regular set or organized schools. They were financed by the city fathers, and when they found out that I had taught before, then they asked me if I would go into the schools. In making my examination, was one of the things they asked me to do was to read the daffodils. I'm sure you girls recall that. The daffodils. And that was...
Well, what were your school hours?
Just as they are at the present time. It wasn't such a long time back. Of course, 50 years may seem quite a bit to you. But the times, the time of classes was very similar. Of course, at this time, I also was interested in the church, and I was not a member of any church, but went into the Episcopal, St. Philip's Episcopal Church. Bishop Brooke was bishop and confirmed me, and Mrs. Milner, Mrs. Charles Milner, and she had the very unusual name of Baroka, and mine was Valula, which a great many people amused a great many people about. I became a member of St. Philip's Guild, and have been that. I couldn't tell you how many years I've been an active member of that, which is in existence at the present time. In our new church, the St. Philip's Guild will decorate and furnish in the new parish house that they are planning to build at this time. They will furnish the money and decorate and furnish that building. That is our project at this time.
Well, what was the old house like? The
old house is the one that still stands to the rear of the present building, and but it was further up on the lot. The present building was built and planned by Reverend Carden, who drew plans for the building and all the inside as well as the outside. Among some of his original work were the hinges on the doors at the present time. He designed it after some English churches that he had known.
Were you always an Episcopal?
No, only since I came to Oklahoma, to the Indian Territory.
Well, was the Episcopal Church always located where it is now?
Where it is at the present time. One of the main things that we did, it seemed to me, this church was located in a creek or a low place in town, and it seemed to me that every half of our money that we bought was spent to buy dirt to fill the lot.
What were the conditions of the roads?
The roads were, they were just plain old country roads as they would have been 50 years ago. After a rain, they were very bad. And when we first began to drive cars here, high sitters were the bugaboo of all drivers.
Well, were the roads the same around the church as they were in town?
Oh, yes, yes. There were no paving at that time, as I'm sure you've heard from various other ones that you've interviewed. There was no paving at all, not even on Main Street. And when it rained, it was boggy, and when it was dry, it was dusty. And there were always hogs and litter from the grocery stores that would get back underneath of this high sidewalks. Some of them was high, some were low, all of them made of plank. And
did you have sidewalks around your church, too?
There were no sidewalks other than just a laid-out street. Maybe it was just a dirt sidewalk or something of that kind. Of course, there was a way to get in and out.
Well,
to them.
In the church, was the church the parish house?
What is known now as the parish house was the church at that time. It was desanctified when it was moved from the present place and put to use as something other than a church.
Well, in other words, I asked you a while ago if it was the parish house. It was a combination parish house and church, wasn't it?
We had no parish house at that time.
Oh. Well, who was the vicar at the time you moved here?
when I came, Mr. Henry B. Smith was our rector, and he continued with us a good many years. We've had a number of rectors, and some of those that I recall, one was Mr. Goldenhouse, one was Mr. Carden, who built architected the present building. And then Mr. Quarterman came to us as a young theological student. He stayed with us 13 years and was made bishop of Northwest Texas from Ardmore. We were very proud and happy to have him advanced. Mr. Morton, of course, is our present rector. He was a student with Mr. Quarterman at the time in New York together. Of course, he was chaplain a good many years in the war and came to us when Mr. Quarterman was made bishop of North Texas.
Well, how many people attended?
Our attendance, our membership was very small, 30, 40, or thereabout.
Well, how many churches approximately?
Oh, there must have been 8 or 10 churches in the town: Methodist, Presbyterian, Baptist, and I just don't recall any of the rest of them. But those were the big churches.
Well, were the churches in town, or were they a little ways outside?
They were all very close in. The old Methodist church is where the community hall is at the present time. It was a Baptist church right very near to that. And there was a Presbyterian, Cumberland Presbyterian, where the courthouse is at the present time. And the Methodist, and let me see, the Presbyterian church was, well, that's the Cumberland Presbyterian. Well, that's about it.
Well, how did you heat the church?
The churches were heated with coal in stoves, and possibly wood, I expect.
And how were they lighted?
Lighted by kerosene lamps or gasoline lamps. They might have been up until the time electricity was put in.
Whose responsibility was it to watch over the church to see that it was heated and lighted?
It was usually some of the members. I've been told that in the first part of the history of this church that Mrs. Sibley used to put in the back of her buggy wood and come and heat and help sweep out the building to have things ready for services or for any kind of meetings. And the churches were always kept locked, but not during the daytime with us. Our church is always left open for people to go in and meditate and get themselves right spiritually.
Well, did you have stained glass windows?
There were no stained glass windows in the building that is now occupied as the parish house, but when we built the new building, we had some stained windows that we are very proud of. Each of them, nearly all of them, are dedicated to various members. The Poland family, the Norman family, Mr. and Mrs. Gregory have a special window, and the large window in the north is not assigned at the present time, but some of these days it will be assigned to somebody. The ladies of the guild put in a tablet not long ago to Reverend Carden, who, in memory of Reverend Carden, who was the builder of this present church.
Did you always have a ladies of the guild?
Almost from the beginning, there's been the St. Philip's Guild in this church. Later on, I don't remember who was rector. the Service League, and then the Trinity Guild, and then the Round Table, I believe they're called at the present time, and the young people's organizations came on. But in the beginning, it was St. Philip's Episcopal Guild, and one member at this time is still alive. That's Mrs. Hetty Norman, and she knows the history of this church backward and forward, and has written a paper for us telling what a great many of the symbols of the church about them, and about the gifts that had been made to the church and who gave them. And a very interesting paper that should be published every once in a while, so that the present members could know who has given and what the various symbols of our church mean.
We were talking about the stained glass windows. How were those
bought?
No, ma'am. How were they, as you said, assigned to people?
By people when the church was built. A window would cost, say, $300. Well, that person would give $300 then and pay for their church, and then they had a little brass plate tacked onto the windowsill saying that this belonged to such and such in memory of various people.
Well, the pews are that way too. Were they in the beginning of the church, or when
in
you
the
first
beginning of
came
the
here?
church? They were bought, and then each pew, if I remember correctly, was cost $75 a piece, and we as members of the various churches bought these pews. Each one of them has a person's name on it. Mine is assigned as B.R. Newcombe. Then where two people had a pew, one little silver plate was put on one end and one at the other end, until as far as they went. There are some pews in the back of the church at the present time that are not assigned. Someone, and I don't know who did that, gave the where the children are christened, the fount, and it has been, of course, the scene of a good many of the present members of the church, of the younger members of the church, have been christened there in the rear. And, of course, all of the confirmations take place at the altar. And the bishop's chair and the most recent gift in furniture was given by Mrs. Carol Sutton, who gave one of the pews in the sanctuary in memory of her husband, Mr. Paul Sutton.
Did you always have low church? Was the church?
It has at times been, and I wouldn't say that it's low church entirely, but it's more low, I guess, than high church.
And it's always been?
Yes.
Well, did you have a choir?
Always had a choir, none of them possibly as good as it is at the present time. Always music means a great deal to the Episcopal Church, and we have at times had to struggle, but always had music of some kind and a choir. Sometimes it is pretty hard on the members. They had not much encouragement. Sometimes they didn't even have the proper organist, and people did the best they could as volunteers, but not the choir that we have at the present time. At the present time, I think we have one of the best choirs, I'd say, in Ardmore. But, of course, I'm prejudiced toward the Episcopal Church.
Well, did you always have an organ?
Always had an organ, but the one at the present time is, of course, our best, and it was given to us, or made so we could afford it through Harry Lowenstein, who I think this organ at one time was down in the picture show, the Tivoli Theater. And they were making changes in some way, and through his kindness, we were allowed to purchase it for far less than its real value. And it was set up and has been in service since Harry's lifetime.
Well, what type of musical instruments did you have?
Old-fashioned organ that had to be pumped. Sometimes the children sat in the back and pumped it by hand. And when we got a mechanical pump, we thought we were doing pretty well.
Well, did you have the organ in the back of the church then instead of now?
Yes, the organ always set in the pulpit part of the church.
I meant in the back of the people. Did it used to sit back there?
No. The music in the choir, unless old-fashioned churches sometimes had them in a choir loft in the back of the church, but never in Ardmore. We've always had our choir in the front.
Has the cross always...
The cross is always, this cross that we have at the present time on our altar is a gift from the Hammer family of Captain Hammer, who was early Indian Territory marshal. And it is always on our altar. If it isn't this cross, it is some cross. And our candles always have been, I don't know where the present candlesticks came from, but they have been.
Did you always have the chalice for communion?
Always have had a chalice. I don't know where the one that we have now came from. At one time we had a gift through a Mrs. McNaught who was a member here, but I don't know the history of the present chalice that is used in communion.
Exactly, or do you know approximately what year you joined the Episcopal Church?
Well, possibly 10 years after I would make it along about 1912.
About 1912?
About that.
Did the church have social events like bazaars?
Our church was noted for the amount of money that they made and the original manner in which they presented it. They were always good cooks, and always when we gave a dinner or any special affair, of course always to make money, we were always well patronized. Our bazaars, we made a great deal of money. We had to at that time to help keep the church and to get ready to build the present church. And
well, what did you sell at your bazaars?
Everything. Just as they do at the present time.
Well, can you elaborate a little bit?
Oh, I wouldn't
dish towels?
Always. Of course, dish towels.
Candy?
And candies. We had special people who made candies.
What part did you play in the bazaars?
Anything that they asked me to do. Sometimes I washed dishes, sometimes I helped cook. A great many times I served the tables, and always sewed or did anything that I could. Especially, it seemed to me like I spent a great deal of my time washing dishes, as all bazaars and church affairs. Yeah, they always have something to eat, of course.
Did you ever go on any church picnics? Did they have them?
Oh, yes. We always had church picnics, and a great many times, I think possibly a great many of them for the younger children, we went to Whittington Park. And, of course, that was in town. We didn't make any long treks or anything of that kind on picnics.
Well, weren't picnics just a gala event, regardless?
Always, and you always enjoyed it and had plenty to eat, and like every other picnic that, as you people, you kids do at the present time, get out and go on a picnic.
Well, did everybody go on the picnics? And
always,
all families?
The grown-ups as well as the young people. We were very good about attending everyone going on the picnics. We didn't have a very large church here at that time. Under the tutelage, under the care of Mr. Quarterman, Bishop Quarterman he is now, and Mr. Morton, our membership in this St. Philip's Episcopal Church has grown marvelously under Bishop Cassidy and our present bishop, Bishop Powell.
Well, excluding the church were picnics.
Yes.
Well, did everybody like to go on them?
They had one of the main picnics that they had was the Ardmore's birthday breakfast. Then everybody in Ardmore went out to Whittington's Park and had breakfast together. Haven't you been here since they've had those breakfasts?
I believe I have.
Yes. Well, and one of Haven't you been here since they've had those breakfasts?
I believe I have.
Yes. Well, and one of the chief instigators of that is Mr. Easley, Mr. John Easley, and everybody goes and takes their bread and eggs and bacon and skillet, or I took Boy Scout outfit the last time I went. And everybody, you'll see people not only from Ardmore, but from the adjoining county.
Well, what type of transportation did you have?
I had, and most of us had, a great many some of them were fortunate enough to get cars early, but I drove a pony, or a pair of ponies, and had a surrey with a fringe around the top. One time, we also had a buggy, and this had an umbrella that went, that had a standard from the back and went to the front. One day, one of the horses decided he'd run away with me, and had my son in the buggy, and I'd often wondered how I would manage if they did run away with me. Well, I finally got him down to the floor and put my foot on his dress and tried to pull the reins back, but I was so busy holding Thomas with one hand that I couldn't pull other than just to pull the reins back. And a man named Watkins rode ahead of me and stopped the horse. This man now lives, he was at the time lived out west of where the football field is. And he stopped the horse and rescued the lady in distress.
Well, did you ever ride in the car?
Oh, yes, after a number of years, but I didn't have a car for a long time. One of my early friends, a Mrs. Downard, had a car, and she was kind enough to let me go with her a great many times. And, of course, always there were cars in length of time, cars for hire. I think the first car that I owned was a Buick. Harry Lowenstein taught me how to drive. And the day that I was to graduate, I was going to cross the railroad track on K Street up here, and the train was coming along, and I said to Harry, can I beat that train? He said, there's one thing you have a respect for, is a train. Don't ever try to beat a train.
Well, I believe we were talking a little earlier, and you said something about a Stanhope.
That was in Wynnewood, one of the early striking vehicles. It was bright red, it was very high, and you hitched one horse to it. And of course it was something that was very attractive, and if the young lady that got to drive it could go down Main Street and drive this Stanhope, she was the center of a good deal of attention. And I always enjoyed, my sister had this Stanhope, and I enjoyed getting the horse out and driving it, riding down Main Street and attracting what attention I could.
Oh, well, Mrs. Newcombe, I certainly do thank you for helping me with my interview. And this interview was given by Sandy Peterson, a senior in Ardmore High School.
I'm